Stay quiet. They have guns, the Hell's Angel told the little girl, seconds before it was too late. Jake stepped out of the smoky bar, the heavy metal door swinging shut behind him. The cold night air hit his face like a slap, a welcome relief from the stuffy chaos inside. His leather jacket creaked as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled pack of cigarettes. With practiced hands, he tapped one out and lit it, the flame from his lighter briefly illuminating his weathered face. He took a deep drag, letting the smoke fill his lungs. The nicotine did little to calm the storm brewing inside him. Tonight's encounter with the River Rats gang had left him on edge. It wasn't the usual territorial bickering or muscle flexing that happened between rival groups. This felt different, personal. "You tell your brothers they're living on borrowed time," the Rats leader had spat at him, getting too close for comfort. "The truce is over." Jake had stared him down, not giving an inch. "You sure you want to start something you can't finish?" But now, alone in the parking lot, those words hung heavy in the night air. The Hells Angels and the River Rats had kept an uneasy peace for nearly 2 years. Breaking it would mean blood on both sides. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. Jake flicked his cigarette ash onto the cracked asphalt. 23 years with the Angels had taught him to recognize when trouble was brewing. Tonight felt like the calm before a hurricane. He leaned against the brick wall of the bar, listening to the muffled sounds of the jukebox inside. At 45, he was older than many of the brothers. His body carried the scars of countless fights and crashes. Yet here he was, still standing, still riding, still ready to do what needed to be done for the club. The parking lot was nearly empty, just a few motorcycles and trucks scattered across the potholed surface. Jake's Harley, a black Road King he the 500th rebuilt himself, waited faithfully under the single flickering street lamp. The chrome gleamed dully in the weak light, like an old friend beckoning him home. Home. Jake almost laughed at the thought. His apartment was just a place to crash between rides. The club was his real home, had been since he was 22, with nothing but anger and a chip on his shoulder the size of Texas. He finished his cigarette and ground it under his boot. Time to head back. The brothers would want to know about the River Rats' threats. Plans would need to be made, territories secured. As Jake pushed off from the wall, a pickup truck roared into the parking lot, its headlights briefly blinding him. It swerved, tires screeching, and parked haphazardly near the entrance. 4 men jumped out, all wearing the River Rats colors. Jake tensed, his hand automatically reaching for the knife in his pocket. The men didn't notice him standing in the shadows. They seemed agitated, talking in hushed but urgent voices as they hurried into the bar. "Something's not right," Jake muttered to himself. He waited a moment, then walked toward his bike, senses alert. The night had grown quieter, the sounds from the bar seeming distant and unimportant compared to the tension in the air. Jake swung his leg over his Harley, feeling the familiar comfort of the saddle beneath him. He was about to start the engine when he heard it, the sharp crack of gunshots coming from a few blocks away. Once, twice, 3 times. Jake froze, his hand on the ignition. More shots followed, along with the squeal of tires and shouting. Against his better judgment, he dismounted and moved toward the sound. The street behind the bar led to an alley that connected to the next block. Whatever was happening, it was close. As he rounded the corner, he saw the aftermath. A car with its driver's side window shattered, blood on the pavement. No bodies, but the signs of violence were clear. That's when he saw it. A small figure crouched behind a parked truck. A child, no more than 4 or 5 years old, huddled against the tire. Even from a distance, Jake could see the blood on her clothes, the terror in her eyes. His instincts screamed at him. "Get on your bike. Right away. This isn't your problem." But his feet were already moving toward her. The little girl looked up as he approached, her face streaked with tears and dirt. She was trembling. Her small hands clutched around a stuffed rabbit that was as blood-stained as her dress. Jake didn't know who she was or what she was running from. But in that moment, one thing became crystal clear. He needed to protect her. Jake moved quickly toward the truck, keeping low. His years with the Angels had taught him to assess danger fast. This situation screamed trouble from every angle. The little girl huddled against the truck tire, her small body shaking like a leaf in a storm. As he approached, she pressed herself harder against the wheel, trying to disappear. "Hey there," Jake whispered, crouching down to her level. "I'm not going to hurt you." The girl's eyes were wide with fear, her cheeks streaked with tears cutting paths through the dirt and blood on her face. She clutched a ragged stuffed rabbit to her chest, like it was her only lifeline. "My name's Jake," he said, his gruff voice softening despite himself. "What's yours?" She stared at him, silent and trembling. "Emily," she finally whispered, so quietly he almost missed it. "Emily," he repeated. "That's a nice name." Jake glanced over his shoulder, scanning the alley. The gunshots had stopped, but that didn't mean the danger was gone. His instincts told him they needed to move, and fast. "Where's your mom, Emily?" he asked, trying to piece together what had happened. Emily's bottom lip quivered, and she pointed a tiny finger toward the car with the shattered window. Jake's stomach sank. He'd seen enough death to know what that meant. "She's sleeping," Emily said, her voice breaking. "They made her sleep, and she won't wake up." Jake felt something crack inside him, a feeling he thought he'd buried long ago. This kid had just watched her mother die. His jaw tightened as he fought back unexpected emotion. "Is there someone I can take you to?" he asked. "Your dad, maybe?" Emily shook her head. "Daddy's away. Mommy said he's in trouble." "Great. Just great." Jake ran a hand over his face, feeling the rough stubble against his palm. This wasn't his problem. He should walk away, call the cops, let them handle it. But as he looked at Emily's frightened face, he knew he couldn't leave her. "Listen, kiddo," he said. "We need to get out of here. It's not safe." As if to emphasize his point, the sound of a car door slamming echoed from nearby, followed by angry voices. "Check everywhere," a man shouted. "The kid must be around here somewhere." Jake's blood ran cold. They were looking for Emily. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. Whatever had happened here, it wasn't over. And for some reason, these people wanted the little girl. He made a split-second decision. "Emily, I'm going to help you, okay? But you need to trust me." Emily looked at him for a long moment, her eyes wise beyond her years, sizing him up. Then she nodded slightly, clutching her rabbit tighter. Jake carefully reached out, moving slowly so as not to frighten her. He gently wiped some of the blood from her cheek with his bandana. It wasn't her blood, he realized with relief. Small mercies. "Can you be really brave for me?" he asked. "We need to be super quiet and stay hidden until the bad people go away." Emily nodded again, her chin jutting out with surprising determination for such a small child. Jake positioned himself beside her, his back against the truck, making himself as small as possible. He pulled Emily close to his side, feeling strange about the protective gesture. He wasn't used to comforting anyone, let alone a kid. The voices were getting closer. Flashlight beams swept the alley, dancing across the pavement just yards from their hiding spot. "She couldn't have gone far," one voice said. "Boss wants her found tonight." "What about the woman?" another asked. "Forget her. She's done. It's the kid we need." Jake felt Emily stiffen beside him as she recognized the voices. Her breathing quickened, panic visible in her eyes. He could feel her small heart racing like a trapped bird. Heavy footsteps approached the truck. Jake tensed, ready to fight if necessary, but hoping it wouldn't come to that. Not with Emily here. The footsteps paused, then continued, coming even closer. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he pulled Emily tighter against him. He leaned down, his lips close to her ear. "Stay quiet," he whispered urgently. "They have guns." He covered her mouth with his gloved hand, gently but firmly, and pulled her as close as possible to his chest. Emily didn't resist. She seemed to understand the gravity of the situation despite her young age. Jake held his breath as the footsteps approached the truck, the sound echoing in the quiet alley like drumbeats, counting down to disaster. Jake pressed his back against the cold metal of the truck, feeling every beat of his heart like thunder in his chest. Emily's tiny body trembled against him, her rabbit clutched tight between them. He kept his gloved hand gently over her mouth, feeling her warm, frightened breaths against his palm. The footsteps grew louder, crunching gravel. Heavy boots. Jake counted 3 different rhythms. 3 men, at least. Flashlight beams danced across the alley, creating long shadows that stretched and distorted along the brick walls. "Check under the vehicles," a gruff voice ordered. Jake tightened his grip around Emily, pulling her further into the shadows beneath the truck. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, fixed on his face like he was her only hope in the world. The weight of that trust felt heavier than any burden he'd ever carried. A beam of light swept near their hiding spot, illuminating the grimy asphalt just inches from Jake's boot. He slowly pulled his foot back, not daring to breathe. The light lingered for what felt like an eternity before moving on. "Nothing here," someone called out. "Keep looking," the first voice snapped. "She's just a kid. She couldn't have gotten far." Emily's small fingers dug into Jake's arm. He glanced down at her, trying to communicate reassurance with just his eyes. Her face was pale in the dim light, streaked with tears and dirt. So damn young to be caught up in something like this. Footsteps approached the truck. A dark figure moved alongside it, so close Jake could smell cigarettes and something metallic that might have been blood. The man's boots stopped just feet away from their hiding place. Jake's muscles tensed, ready to spring into action if they were discovered. His mind raced through options, none of them good. He couldn't fight and protect Emily at the same time, not against multiple armed men. The seconds stretched like hours as the man stood there. Jake could hear him breathing, could almost feel his presence through the metal of the truck. Emily's eyes squeezed shut, her little body completely still now, except for the slight trembling Jake could feel against his chest. "Hey!" a voice called from further down the alley. "I think I saw something move over here." The boots pivoted and moved away quickly. Jake released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, his lungs burning with relief. But they weren't safe yet. "Spread out," the leader commanded. "Check behind those dumpsters, and the fire escape." The footsteps scattered, moving away from the truck. Jake strained his ears, tracking their movements. The beams of light focused on the far end of the alley now, away from their hiding spot. "Nothing here either," someone called, frustration evident in his voice. "She's got to be somewhere." Another replied, "Keep looking." Jake waited, counting each second in his head. Emily's breathing had steadied somewhat, though she remained perfectly still against him. The kid had guts. He had to give her that. Finally, after what seemed like hours, the voices grew more distant. The lights moved further away, sweeping across the street beyond the alley. Jake listened intently, making sure they were really leaving and not just trying to flush them out. "Boss ain't gonna be happy," one of the men said, his voice echoing faintly. "We'll check the next block," another replied. "She couldn't have vanished." Their voices faded. The footsteps grew distant until they disappeared entirely. The alley fell silent, except for the distant wail of a siren somewhere in the city and the occasional car passing on the main road. Jake waited another full minute before slowly removing his hand from Emily's mouth. He put a finger to his lips, signaling for her to remain quiet. She nodded, understanding. He released a long, slow breath, feeling his tense muscles begin to relax. They'd dodged a bullet, Literally, maybe. But they weren't out of danger yet. Not by a long shot. "Are they gone?" Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. "I think so," Jake replied softly. "For now." Emily's bottom lip quivered. Her small face crumpled as the reality of everything crashed down upon her. Her eyes welled with fresh tears as she looked up at Jake. "Mommy's gone," she said in a soft, scared voice that broke something inside Jake's hardened heart. Jake's throat tightened as he looked down at the small girl in his arms. Emily's face was streaked with dirt and tears, her eyes wide with a kind of pain no child should ever have to know. He had seen that look before, in the mirror, when he was not much older than her. The look of someone whose world had just been shattered. "What happened to your mommy?" Jake asked, his voice gentler than he thought possible. Emily's bottom lip trembled. Her small fingers clutched the stuffed rabbit tighter, pulling it against her chest like a shield. "The bad men," she whispered. "They were yelling at Mommy. She told me to hide." Jake nodded, encouraging her to continue. He kept his ears tuned to their surroundings, alert for any sign the gang might double back. "Mommy pushed me behind the big truck," Emily continued, her voice breaking. "She said not to come out no matter what." Then there were lots of loud noises. Gunshots, Jake thought grimly. The kid had been forced to listen to her mother being gunned down, hiding just feet away. "The bad men were shooting," Emily said, confirming his suspicions. "Mommy fell down. She didn't get back up." Her voice was hollow, matter-of-fact in that strange way children sometimes process trauma. There was lots of red. Jake closed his eyes for a moment. He'd seen plenty of death in his time, had even caused some of it. But this, a mother gunned down in front of her child, this crossed a line that even men like him respected. "Did you know those men?" Jake asked carefully. "Did they know your mommy?" Emily nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "They came to our house before. Mommy would get really scared. She'd lock all the doors and make me hide in the closet." "What did they want?" "Money," Emily said. "They said Mommy owed them. She cried a lot when they left." Jake's jaw tightened. Loan sharks or drug debts. Either way, it spelled trouble. "Mommy said we had to run away," Emily continued, her small voice growing even quieter. "She said Daddy would help us, but we had to find him first." "Your daddy?" Jake asked. "Where is he?" Emily shrugged her tiny shoulders. "I don't know. Mommy said he had to go away for a while. She said he was hiding from the bad men too." Jake's mind started connecting dots he wished weren't there. A woman running from a gang. A father in hiding. Gunmen hunting down a 4-year-old girl. This wasn't some random act of violence. This was targeted. "What's your daddy's name, sweetheart?" he asked, dreading the answer. "Daddy's name is Michael," Emily replied. "Michael Turner." Jake felt like he'd been punched in the gut. Michael Turner. The name echoed in his head like a warning bell. Turner had been a prominent figure in the local underworld before disappearing 3 years ago, right after stealing a fortune from the Black Scorpions, the rival gang that had been at war with Jake's crew for years. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Emily's mother hadn't just been some innocent bystander. She'd been Turner's woman, probably helping him hide all this time. And now the Scorpions had found her, hoping she would lead them to Turner. And the money. Jake looked down at the child in his arms. Her eyes were heavy with exhaustion, her little body limp with the aftermath of terror. She had no idea of the dangerous world she'd been born into. A bitter taste filled Jake's mouth as the truth sank in. Emily's mother had been connected to the rival gang, not as a member, but as the partner of one of their most wanted enemies. This wasn't just about protecting a random kid anymore. This little girl's life was now entwined with the very thing Jake had spent years running from. The gang politics, the blood feuds, the unforgiving code of the streets. Jake looked down at Emily, her small face still streaked with tears and dirt. The weight of what he'd just learned pressed down on his shoulders like a ton of bricks. Michael Turner's kid. Of all the children in the world to stumble across, he'd found the daughter of the most wanted man in the city's underworld. "We can't stay here," Jake said, his voice low and rough. "Those men might come back." Emily's lip quivered. "Where will we go?" Jake scanned the dark street, his mind racing. The safest place would be his apartment, but that was across town. Too far to walk with a child, and his motorcycle wasn't exactly made for passengers, especially not 4-year-old ones. "I know a place," he said finally. "But we need to move fast and stay quiet. Can you do that?" Emily nodded, her small chin jutting out with determination that reminded him of someone much older. "I'm good at being quiet." "I bet you are, kid." Jake stood up slowly, keeping his movements smooth so as not to startle her. He held out his hand. "We're going to walk through some dark places. You hold on to me tight, okay?" Emily slipped her tiny hand into his large, calloused one. Her fingers felt impossibly small, like a bird's bones. Jake looked down at their joined hands and felt something shift inside him. Something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Responsibility. Not the kind he felt to his gang brothers, but something deeper and more primal. They started moving away from the truck, staying close to the shadows of buildings. Jake kept his pace slow enough for Emily's short legs, but quick enough to put distance between them and the scene of the shooting. The night air was cold, and he noticed Emily shivering in her thin jacket. Without a word, he shrugged off his leather jacket and draped it over her shoulders. It swallowed her completely, trailing on the ground behind her like a royal robe, but at least it would keep her warm. "Thank you," she whispered, pulling it tighter around herself. Jake nodded, feeling strangely vulnerable in just his t-shirt. The leather jacket wasn't just clothing to him. It was armor, identity. But seeing it wrapped around Emily's tiny frame, he couldn't bring himself to regret giving it up. They turned down a narrow alley between 2 brick buildings. The smell of garbage and urine hung in the air, and Jake instinctively pulled Emily closer to his side, away from the overflowing dumpsters. Rats scurried away at their approach, their eyes gleaming in the dim light. "I don't like it here," Emily whispered, pressing herself against Jake's leg. "Me neither," Jake admitted. "But it's the fastest way to get where we're going." They continued through the maze of alleys, Jake's senses on high alert. Every sound, a distant car horn, the rattle of a loose fire escape, the yowl of a stray cat, made him tense. He kept expecting to hear footsteps behind them, to feel the burn of eyes watching their progress. Emily stumbled once, her exhaustion evident in the drag of her feet. Without hesitation, Jake scooped her up into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, and she immediately rested her head against his shoulder, her small body relaxing against his chest. "Not much further now," he murmured, more to himself than to her. The building came into view as they turned one final corner, a nondescript 3-story structure with peeling paint, and a fire escape zigzagging up one side. It wasn't much to look at, but Jake knew it was safe. An old friend, one who had left the life behind years ago, owned the place. It was the one spot in the city Jake was certain the Scorpions wouldn't think to look. As they approached the building, Emily lifted her head from Jake's shoulder. Her eyes, wide and trusting, looked up at his face. "Are we safe now?" she asked, her voice small and hopeful. Jake didn't answer right away. Were they safe? The Scorpions were still out there. They'd killed Emily's mother, and would likely kill anyone who got in the way of their search for Michael Turner. And here was Jake, a Hell's Angel, carrying the most valuable bargaining chip in the city. No, they weren't safe. Not by a long shot. He looked down at Emily's innocent face, at the complete trust in her eyes, and felt the weight of her question in his chest. They moved inside, hoping they'd found refuge. Inside the dimly lit building, Jake gently set Emily down on a worn couch. The apartment was small, but clean. A living room that connected to a kitchenette, with a single bedroom and bathroom off to the side. Dust particles danced in the air, where moonlight filtered through the thin curtains. "Let me take a look at you, kid," Jake said, his voice softer than usual. Emily sat very still, like a small bird perched on the edge of a branch. Jake's leather jacket still engulfed her tiny frame, the sleeves hanging well past her hands. In this light, he could see her more clearly. There was dried blood on her cheek and forehead, but he couldn't tell if it was hers or someone else's. The thought made his stomach clench. "Does anything hurt?" he asked, crouching down to her level. Emily pointed to her knee. Jake carefully rolled up her pant leg to reveal a nasty scrape, still oozing blood. "I fell when the loud noises started," she whispered. Jake nodded, his jaw tight. The loud noises had been gunshots, the ones that had likely killed her mother. He'd seen plenty of bullet wounds in his time, had even stitched up his fair share of brothers after bar fights and territory disputes. But this was different. This was a child who should have been tucked safely in bed, not running for her life in a dark alley. "I'm going to clean this up," Jake said, standing. "Don't move." He went to the bathroom and found a first aid kit under the sink. His friend had always been prepared. When he returned, Emily was exactly where he'd left her. Only her eyes had followed his movement across the room. Jake wet a clean cloth and gently dabbed at the blood on her face. It came away easily, not her blood then. He felt a wave of relief wash over him. "This might sting a little," he warned as he cleaned the scrape on her knee. Emily flinched, but didn't cry out. She was tougher than she looked. "You're being real brave," Jake said as he placed a bandage over the cleaned wound. "Most grown men I know would be howling by now." That earned him a tiny smile, and for a moment the weight in his chest lifted. "Are you a doctor?" Emily asked, watching as he packed up the first aid supplies. Jake let out a short laugh. "No, kid, not even close." "Then what are you?" Jake paused, unsure how to answer. What was he? A criminal? A biker? A man who had spent most of his life fighting and running? "I'm just someone who's going to keep you safe for now," he finally said. Emily seemed to accept this answer, nodding solemnly, as if he had shared some profound truth. "Are you hungry?" Jake asked, changing the subject. "Yes," Emily admitted. "My tummy is making growly sounds." Jake checked the kitchen and found some canned soup and crackers. Not much, but it would do for tonight. As he heated the soup on the stove, he watched Emily out of the corner of his eye. She had slipped off the couch and was now examining a small bookshelf in the corner, her fingers tracing the spines of the books. Something about the sight made Jake's chest tighten. This little girl had just lost her mother, was being hunted by killers, and here she was, curious about books. The unfairness of it all hit him like a physical blow. His phone vibrated in his pocket, breaking the moment. Jake pulled it out and read the message from Snake, one of his oldest friends in the Hells Angels. "Whole city's hot. Scorpions put 50K on your head. What the hell did you do?" Jake's blood ran cold. The Scorpions thought he had Emily, but they weren't really after him. They were after Michael Turner, Emily's father, the man who had betrayed the Scorpions years ago, taking their money and disappearing. And now they thought Jake was harboring his daughter. He looked over at Emily, who had pulled out a children's book and was turning the pages carefully. She was just collateral damage in a war she didn't even know existed. Jake moved to the window, parting the dusty curtains just enough to peek outside. The street remained empty, but that wouldn't last. The Scorpions were out there, hunting. He let the curtain fall back into place and turned to look at Emily, who had fallen asleep on the couch with the children's book still open on her lap. His mind wandered to a time years ago, when he'd known her father, Michael Turner. They called him Ghost back then, because of how easily he could disappear after a job. Ghost had been one of the smartest guys Jake had ever met, smart enough to steal from the Scorpions and vanish without a trace. Jake rubbed his beard, memories flooding back. 5 years ago, Ghost had been the Scorpions' money man. handling their finances, laundering cash through a string of businesses. Then, one day, he disappeared with nearly $500,000 of their money. The Scorpions had been hunting him ever since. Jake remembered the last time he saw Ghost. They'd met at a bar downtown, Ghost looking over his shoulder every few minutes. "I'm done, Jake," Ghost had said, his voice low. "I've got a kid now. Can't keep living like this." Jake hadn't known about Emily then. He'd thought Ghost was just making excuses. "They'll kill you if they find you," Jake had warned. Ghost had just smiled, that confident smile of his. "They won't find me." And they hadn't. Until now, somehow. The Scorpions must have connected Emily to Ghost. Maybe they'd been watching her mother, hoping she'd lead them to him. Jake walked quietly to the kitchenette and poured himself a glass of water. His hands weren't as steady as he wanted them to be. If the Scorpions found him with Emily, they'd kill them both without hesitation. He looked at Emily again. Her small chest rose and fell with each breath, her face peaceful in sleep. Something stirred in Jake's heart, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long, long time. Protectiveness, not the kind he felt for his brothers in the club, but something purer, something that made him want to shield her from all the ugliness in the world. Jake sat down in a chair across from the couch, his mind turning over possibilities. He could drop Emily at a police station, wash his hands of the whole mess. But the cops would ask questions he couldn't answer, and meanwhile, the Scorpions would still be hunting. No, the police weren't an option. He could take her to one of his brothers, ask them to hide her, but that would just put a target on their backs too. The only real solution was to find Ghost before the Scorpions did. If he could get to Ghost, warn him, maybe they could figure out a way to keep Emily safe. But finding Ghost wouldn't be easy. The man had made an art form out of disappearing. Jake would have to dig deep, call in favors, put himself at risk. Was he really willing to do all that for a kid he barely knew? Emily stirred in her sleep, her small face scrunching up as if she was having a bad dream. Without thinking, Jake moved to the couch and gently adjusted the jacket he'd draped over her. His hand lingered for a moment on her shoulder. "It's okay, kid," he whispered. "You're safe." The words felt strange coming from his mouth, but as Emily settled back into peaceful sleep, Jake made his decision. He would find Ghost, not just to get the Scorpions off his back, but because Emily deserved to have her father. She deserved a chance at a normal life, or as normal as possible, given the circumstances. Jake returned to his chair, pulling out his phone. He scrolled through his contacts, looking for people who might know something about Ghost's whereabouts. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot they had. Morning light began to creep through the windows when Emily finally stirred. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, looking confused for a moment before her gaze settled on Jake. "You're still here," she said, sounding surprised. "I told you I'd keep you safe, didn't I?" Jake replied. Emily nodded, pulling Jake's jacket tighter around her small shoulders. "Emily," Jake said, leaning forward, "I need to ask you something important. When was the last time you saw your dad?" Emily's eyes widened. "My daddy? Mommy said he had to go away for a while. Do you know where he went? Did your mom ever talk about him?" Emily shook her head. "She just said he loves me very much." Jake nodded slowly. "I bet he does. And I think it's time you saw him again." "Are we going to find my daddy?" Emily asked, a spark of hope lighting up her face. "Yeah, kid, we're going on a journey to find your dad," Jake said, his voice firm with new resolve. "And I'm going to make sure you both stay safe." Jake zipped up Emily's jacket, making sure it covered her small frame completely. The morning air was crisp and cold, the kind that bit at your skin and made your eyes water. He'd found some clean clothes for her in a box of donations someone had left at the safe house. They were a little big, but they'd have to do. "Ready to go, kid?" Jake asked, crouching down to her level. Emily nodded, her brown eyes still carrying shadows of fear. She reached out her small hand, and Jake hesitated before taking it. Her fingers were tiny in his rough, calloused palm. They stepped out onto the street, Jake scanning in all directions before moving forward. The neighborhood was starting to wake up. A few early birds heading to work. A newspaper delivery guy tossing rolled papers onto porches. "Where are we going?" Emily asked, having to take 2 steps for every one of Jake's. "To find some friends who might know where your dad is," Jake answered, slowing his pace for her. "Do you know my daddy?" Emily looked up at him with such hope that Jake felt his chest tighten. "Yeah, I knew him. A long time ago." "Was he your friend?" Jake thought about it. Ghost had been many things. A business partner, sometimes a drinking buddy, occasionally a rival. But friend? That wasn't a word Jake used lightly. "We knew each other pretty well," he finally said. They walked 6 blocks to a diner called Molly's. It was the kind of place where information flowed as freely as the coffee, especially if you knew who to ask. Jake pushed open the door, the bell jingling overhead. The waitress behind the counter looked up, her eyes widening slightly at the sight of Jake in his leather jacket with patches. Then her gaze dropped to Emily, and her expression softened. "Booth in the back," Jake told Emily, guiding her through the diner. They slid into a vinyl booth, Emily climbing onto the bench seat opposite Jake. He grabbed a menu and handed it to her. "Can I have pancakes?" Emily asked, her voice small. "Sure thing, kid." The waitress came over, her name tag reading Donna. She looked at Emily with a gentle smile. "Well, aren't you just the cutest thing? What can I get you, sweetie?" "Pancakes, please," Emily said, fidgeting with the salt shaker. "Coffee, black," Jake added. "And is Molly around?" Donna's smile faded slightly. "She's in the back. Want me to get her?" Jake nodded, and Donna disappeared through a swinging door. A few minutes later, a heavy-set woman with graying hair pulled into a tight bun emerged. Her eyes narrowed when she saw Jake, but she came over anyway. "Well, if it isn't Jake Mercer. Didn't expect to see you in my place." Her voice was husky from years of smoking. "Need some information, Molly." Molly glanced at Emily, who was now coloring on a kid's menu with crayons Donna had brought over. "Who's the kid?" she asked quietly. "Someone I'm trying to help. I need to find Ghost." Molly's eyebrows shot up. "Michael Turner? Haven't heard that name in years." "But you know people who might know where he is." Molly sighed, sliding into the booth next to Emily. "You're asking about dangerous things, Jake. The Scorpions have been asking about him too." Jake leaned forward. "That's why I need to find him first. His little girl here is in danger." Molly looked at Emily with new understanding. "She's Ghost's kid? Poor thing." She tapped her fingers on the table, thinking, "I might know someone. Let me make a call." As they waited for their food, Jake kept a watchful eye on the door. Emily ate her pancakes slowly, cutting them into tiny pieces and drowning them in syrup. "Is your friend going to help us find Daddy?" Emily asked between bites. "I hope so," Jake replied, sipping his coffee. After they finished eating, Molly returned to their table and slipped Jake a piece of paper. "Eddie at the Sunrise Motel might know something. Tell him I sent you." Jake paid the bill, leaving a generous tip, and they headed back out onto the street. The Sunrise Motel was about 15 blocks away. Emily's little legs got tired halfway there, and without thinking, Jake hoisted her up onto his shoulders. Her small hands gripped his head for balance, and he found himself holding onto her ankles to keep her steady. "I can see everything from up here," Emily exclaimed, the first real excitement in her voice since Jake had found her. The Sunrise Motel was a run-down place with peeling paint and a flickering neon sign. Jake set Emily down and held her hand tightly as they approached the office. A skinny man with tattoos covering his arms sat behind the desk, watching a small TV. He looked up when they entered. "You Eddie?" Jake asked. The man's eyes narrowed. "Who's asking?" Molly sent me. I'm looking for Ghost. Eddie's gaze flicked to Emily, then back to Jake. Ain't seen him. Jake reached into his pocket and pulled out some cash, sliding it across the counter. Try again. Eddie pocketed the money and leaned forward. There's a place on Westside Drive, Building 17, Apartment 3C. He's been there about a month. Keeps to himself. Jake nodded his thanks, and they left the motel. Emily tugged on his jacket. Did he tell you where Daddy is? She asked, hope lighting up her face. Yeah, kid. I think we found him. Jake squeezed her hand gently. Let's go see your dad. The apartment building on Westside Drive loomed against the darkening sky. A gray concrete block with rows of identical windows. Most had blinds drawn tight. A few showed the blue flicker of television screens. Jake stood across the street, assessing the place while Emily held his hand. Is my daddy in there? Emily asked, her small voice hopeful yet uncertain. That's what we're going to find out, Jake replied, his eyes scanning the area for any sign of trouble. The gun tucked into his waistband, pressed against his hip as he led Emily across the street. He'd never been comfortable bringing a kid anywhere near a weapon, but these weren't normal circumstances. The cold metal was a necessary evil, a reminder of the danger that followed them like a shadow. The front door of the building hung slightly ajar, its security lock long since broken. The lobby smelled of cigarettes and something else. Something sour that Jake couldn't quite place. Graffiti marked the walls, and the floor tiles were cracked and stained. Stay close, Jake murmured, guiding Emily toward the stairwell. The elevator had an out-of-order sign taped to it that looked months old. As they climbed the stairs, Jake listened for any unusual sounds. Each footstep echoed in the concrete stairwell. Emily's smaller steps created a rhythmic pattern behind his heavier tread. 3 floors up, Jake told her when she began to slow down. Not much further. On the 3rd floor, the hallway stretched out before them, lined with doors bearing peeling number plates. The carpet was threadbare, worn down to its backing in places. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, one of them flickering erratically. 3C, Jake muttered, counting the doors as they passed. This way. Emily's grip on his hand tightened as they approached the door. Jake stopped a few feet away, his free hand moving instinctively to touch the gun at his hip. For a moment he hesitated. What would Ghost's reaction be after all these years? And how would he react to seeing his daughter with a Hell's Angel? You ready? Jake asked, looking. They know you're here, Ghost. Jake's voice filled the cramped apartment, bouncing off the peeling wallpaper and water-stained ceiling. The Scorpions are hunting you, not me. Ghost, Emily's father, stood with his back to the grimy window, arms folded across his chest. The years hadn't been kind to him. His face was gaunt, weathered by time and hard living. Deep lines etched around his eyes told stories of sleepless nights and constant vigilance. You bring my kid here after all these years and expect me to believe you're some kind of savior? Ghost spat on the floor. I know what game you're playing, Jake. You want something. The small apartment was barely livable. A mattress in one corner, takeout containers piled on a rickety table, and empty bottles scattered across the floor. The air hung heavy with cigarette smoke and desperation. Emily sat silently on a wooden chair in the corner, her legs dangling above the floor, eyes darting between the two men. Her small hands clutched the edge of the seat, knuckles white with tension. This isn't a game, Jake said, keeping his voice steady. Your daughter was there when they shot up the place looking for you. She saw her mother die. Ghost's face twitched, a flicker of pain crossing his features, before the hardness returned. And why should I trust you? Last I checked, you were still riding with Rico's crew. That was years ago, Jake replied. Things change. People change. Not in our world, Ghost said with a bitter laugh. Nobody changes. They just find new ways to stab you in the back. Jake took a step forward. Listen to me. The Scorpions have a price on your head. They're tearing up the city looking for you. They killed Emily's mother, and they'll kill her too if it means getting to you. So, what's your brilliant plan? We all hold hands and ride off into the sunset?" Ghost's voice dripped with sarcasm. "You know better than that, Jake. There's nowhere to run from the Scorpions. We can get you both out of town. I know people who can help." Ghost shook his head. "I've survived this long by myself. I don't need your help, and I sure as hell don't need you telling me how to protect my own kid." "Your kid?" Jake's temper flared. "Where were you when she was hiding behind a truck, covered in her mother's blood? Where were you when she was crying herself to sleep every night?" Ghost's face darkened. He stepped toward Jake, fists clenched. "You don't know a damn thing about my life or what I've been through. I know you've been hiding in this dump while your daughter thought you were dead," Jake shouted back. "Some father you turned out to be." The two men stood face to face, tension crackling between them like electricity. Ghost's breath came in short, angry bursts. Jake could see the war raging behind his eyes, pride battling with fear, stubbornness fighting against reason. "I don't need to explain myself to you," Ghost finally said, his voice low and dangerous. "Not to some Hell's Angel who suddenly thinks he's a saint." "This isn't about me," Jake insisted. "It's about Emily. She needs her father." "She needs someone who can protect her," Ghost countered. "And that's not me. Not anymore." "So you're just giving up? Letting the Scorpions win?" Ghost turned away, staring out the dirty window at the street below. "They already won a long time ago. The moment they marked me, I was dead. I just haven't stopped breathing yet." The room fell silent except for the distant sound of traffic and the hum of the ancient refrigerator. Jake watched Ghost's shoulders rise and fall with each breath, the weight of years in hiding crushing down on him. Then, a small voice broke through the tension. "Please, Daddy, come with us." Both men turned to look at Emily. She had slipped off the chair and now stood in the middle of the room, her eyes wide and pleading. "They're going to hurt you." Her voice cracked, tears welling up in her eyes. Ghost stared at his daughter, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time. The hardened shell he had built around himself began to crack, revealing glimpses of the man he once was. His mouth opened, then closed again. The apartment seemed to hold its breath, waiting for his decision. But Ghost remained silent, the weight of his choices bearing down on him like an invisible mountain. Jake's jaw clenched as he closed the apartment door behind them. The hollow click of the latch echoed in the dingy hallway, final as a coffin lid. Emily stood beside him, her small hand finding his rough one in the half-light. "Is Daddy coming?" she asked, her voice tiny in the vast silence between them. Jake looked down at her hopeful eyes and felt something twist inside his chest. How could he explain that her father was too broken, too afraid to help his own daughter? That the man was choosing to hide, rather than protect her? "Not right now, kiddo," he said softly. "Your dad. He needs some time to think." The light in Emily's eyes dimmed, but she nodded like she understood more than a 4-year-old should. Jake had seen that look before, in foster homes, in war zones, in all the places where children grew up too fast. They moved down the hallway, past peeling wallpaper and flickering lights. The building seemed to groan around them, a living thing in pain. Jake's boots made heavy sounds on the worn carpet, while Emily's steps were whisper quiet. "Where are we going now?" Emily asked, struggling to keep up with Jake's long strides. Jake slowed his pace, conscious of her tiny legs. "Somewhere safe," he said, though he had no idea where that might be. The safe house was compromised. Ghost wouldn't help. His options were running out faster than the daylight. At the end of the hall, Jake paused at the stairwell door, listening for any sounds of pursuit. His senses were on high alert, honed by years of living on the edge. The building seemed quiet, but quiet didn't mean safe. Not in his world. "We need to move quick and quiet," he told Emily, crouching down to her level. "Like we're playing a game, okay? The quietest steps win." Emily nodded solemnly, her eyes wide with understanding. "I'm good at being quiet," she whispered. Mommy taught me when the bad men came before. Jake felt that twist in his chest again. Anger, sorrow, guilt all tangled together. What kind of world was this where a 4-year-old had to practice hiding from killers? They descended the stairs, Jake taking them 2 at a time while keeping his hand firmly on Emily's shoulder to steady her. 3 floors down, 2 to go. His mind raced through possibilities. The Scorpions would have people watching his usual haunts. His club brothers were loyal, but bringing this kind of heat to their doorsteps wasn't an option. On the 2nd-floor landing, Emily stumbled, a small whimper escaping her lips as her knee hit the concrete step. Jake froze, listening intently. Had anyone heard? He helped Emily up, checking her knee. A small red mark, but no blood. "You okay?" he whispered. She nodded bravely, blinking back tears. "It just hurts a little." "You're tough," Jake said, meaning it. "Tougher than most grown-ups I know." That earned him a small smile, like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. They continued down, reaching the 1st floor. Jake peered through the small wire mesh window in the stairwell door. The lobby looked empty. Cracked tile floor, mailboxes with broken doors, an abandoned desk where a security guard might have sat decades ago. "When we get outside," Jake said quietly, "we're going to walk normal, like we belong. No running unless I say so. Understand?" Emily nodded again, her face serious with concentration. Jake pushed the door open slowly, wincing at the squeal of rusty hinges. The lobby air was stale and damp, smelling of mildew and cigarettes. They crossed the space quickly, heading for the front entrance. Just as Jake reached for the door handle, he heard it. The unmistakable sound of a car pulling up outside, doors slamming. Heavy footsteps approached the building. "Back!" he hissed, pulling Emily toward the hallway that ran along the side of the lobby. The front door swung open before they could reach cover. Jake pushed Emily behind him, his hand automatically reaching for the gun tucked in his waistband. They pressed themselves against the wall of the dim hallway, Jake's heart pounding in his ears. Multiple sets of footsteps entered the lobby, accompanied by the low murmur of voices. Jake recognized the cadence immediately. Scorpions. Emily clutched at the back of his leather jacket, her small body trembling against him. Jake's mind raced. The back exit was their only chance now, but they'd have to move through the hallway without being seen. He looked down at Emily, putting a finger to his lips. She understood immediately, her eyes wide with fear, but clear with determination. They began to move slowly down the dark hallway, each step carefully placed to avoid any sound. Behind them, the voices in the lobby grew louder. Jake caught fragments of conversation. "Upstairs! Ghost! Finish it!" They were here for Ghost, just as he'd warned. But if they found Jake and Emily in the process, there would be no mercy. The hallway seemed endless, stretching into shadows. Jake could make out a glowing exit sign in the distance, their target. Just a few more yards. Then he heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps, turning into the hallway behind them. Gang members closing in. Jake's muscles tensed. They were out of time. Jake burst through the back door, his hand firmly gripping Emily's small one. The cool night air hit them like a wall after the stuffiness of the building. A narrow alley stretched before them, littered with trash and puddles that reflected the dim streetlights. "Come on," Jake urged, guiding Emily around a dumpster. His eyes scanned their surroundings, looking for threats in every shadow. The sound of the metal door slamming behind them echoed between the brick walls. Emily's breath came in quick little gasps as she tried to keep up with his long strides. Her face was pale in the moonlight, eyes wide with fear, but trusting. That trust squeezed Jake's heart like a vice. "Are the bad men coming?" she whispered. Jake nodded grimly. "Yeah, but we got a head start." He helped her over a fallen trash can, then paused to listen. Faint shouts came from inside the building. The Scorpions had discovered they weren't the only ones looking for Ghost. They reached the end of the alley, where it opened onto a deserted street. Jake crouched down to Emily's level, his weathered hands gentle on her shoulders. "You did real good back there, being quiet," he told her. Her eyes brightened at the praise, and Jake felt that unfamiliar warmth spread through his chest again. But now we need to figure out our next move. His motorcycle was back at the bar, miles away. They had no car, no safe place to go. The Scorpions would be checking all the usual spots, and Jake had burned through most of his favors over the years. A police siren wailed in the distance, making Emily jump. Jake pulled her closer instinctively, shielding her small body with his larger one. "I'm scared," Emily admitted, her voice muffled against his leather jacket. "I know," Jake said softly. "But being scared is okay. Even I get scared sometimes." She looked up at him with surprise. "You do? But you're so big and strong." Jake managed a small smile. "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you keep going anyway." The sound of a door banging open echoed from the alley behind them. Voices called out, angry and determined. "They're coming," Jake muttered. His mind worked frantically. They couldn't keep running forever. Eventually, the Scorpions would catch up. And when they did, Jake looked down at Emily's trusting face and made his decision. This couldn't go on. The little girl deserved better than to spend her life running from her father's enemies. She deserved a chance at normal. "Emily," he said quietly, "I need you to be very brave now." She straightened her small shoulders and nodded solemnly. Jake scanned the street and spotted an all-night diner about a block away. The neon sign flickered in the darkness, promising warmth and witnesses. People meant safety for Emily, at least temporarily. "See that diner?" he pointed. "I need you to go there and find a nice lady. Tell her you're lost and need help." Emily's eyes widened in alarm. "Aren't you coming too?" Jake shook his head slowly. "I need to lead these men away from you. If they follow me, they can't hurt you." "But they might hurt you instead," Emily protested, her voice rising with panic. Jake placed a finger gently on her lips. "Shh. Remember what I said about being brave? This is my turn to be brave." The voices from the alley grew louder. They didn't have much time. Jake quickly explained what Emily needed to do. Go to the diner, find help, tell them she was lost. He gave her the name of a club brother who might be trusted to get her somewhere safe. "But I want to stay with you," Emily insisted, tears welling in her eyes. "I know, kiddo." Jake's voice roughened with emotion he couldn't hide. "But sometimes the bravest thing is letting someone else help you." He helped her to her feet, pointing her toward the diner. Then he turned in the opposite direction, toward the open street where his movement would be easily spotted by the pursuing gang members. It was a dangerous plan, maybe suicidal. He would draw them away, lead them on a chase through the streets and alleys he knew so well. With luck, he might lose them. Without it, well, at least Emily would be safe. Just as he prepared to push her gently toward the diner, Emily grabbed his hand. Her small fingers trembled in his calloused palm. "Promise you'll come back," she whispered fiercely, her eyes bright with tears and determination. Jake looked down at her hand in his, so small, so trusting. He couldn't lie to her. Not now. "I'll find you again," Jake said, the promise catching in his throat. He squeezed Emily's small hand one last time before gently pulling away. The footsteps in the alley grew louder. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness, dancing across brick walls. They were running out of time. "Go now," Jake urged, giving Emily a gentle push toward the diner. "Don't look back. Just keep going." Emily hesitated for only a second, her eyes wide with fear, and something else. Trust. Then she turned and ran, her little legs carrying her toward the safety of the diner's warm lights. Jake watched until she reached the shadows of a parked car, where she crouched down as he'd instructed. The kid was smart. She'd wait until the gang members passed, then make her way to the diner. He turned away, forcing himself not to look back again. Drawing a deep breath, Jake stepped into the middle of the street and shouted, "Hey, Scorpions! Looking for someone?" His voice echoed off the buildings. The footsteps in the alley paused, then quickened. Jake didn't wait to see their faces. He took off running in the opposite direction from Emily, his boots pounding the pavement. The shouts behind him confirmed his plan was working. They'd spotted him. Now, he just needed to stay ahead, long enough for Emily to get safely to the diner. Jake's lungs burned as he pushed himself faster. He wasn't as young as he used to be, but years of street fights and narrow escapes had taught him to ignore the pain. His heart hammered against his ribs, each beat a reminder of what was at stake. He cut down another alley, leaping over a fallen trash can. The Scorpion's angry voices followed him, growing closer. 5 of them, at least. Maybe more. Too many to fight head-on. The weight of his choices pressed down on him with each step. How had he ended up here, running for his life with a little girl's future in his hands? Emily's innocent face flashed in his mind. She was in danger because of men like him, men like her father, men who chose violence and power over everything else. Jake burst out of the alley onto another street, quickly checking his bearings. He knew these streets like the back of his hand. Every alley, every dead end, every escape route. It was one advantage he had over the Scorpions. A car screeched to a halt as he darted across the road. The driver honked angrily. Jake ignored him, already planning his next move. He needed to lead the Scorpions as far from Emily as possible. His boots slipped on wet pavement as he rounded another corner. Behind him, he heard the Scorpions shouting directions to each other, spreading out to cut him off. They were organized. He'd give them that. He went that way. Don't let him get away. Ghost's gonna pay for what he did. The last shout made Jake grimace. Ghost, Emily's father, had clearly crossed some serious lines with the Scorpions. But why take it out on a little girl? The thought fueled Jake's anger, giving him a fresh burst of energy. He zigzagged through a maze of back alleys, ducking under clotheslines and vaulting over fences. His leather jacket felt heavy, slowing him down, but he couldn't risk stopping to remove it. A bullet pinged off the brick wall beside him. Jake swore under his breath. They were shooting now, which meant they were getting desperate. Good. He ducked down another narrow passage between buildings, this one barely wide enough for his shoulders. The darkness swallowed him, hiding him momentarily from his pursuers. Jake paused, struggling to control his ragged breathing. The Scorpions' voices echoed around him, bouncing off walls until it was impossible to tell which direction they were coming from. Jake pressed his back against the cold brick, listening intently. For a moment, he allowed himself to think of Emily. Had she made it to the diner? Was she safe? The thought of her, alone and afraid, tore at something deep inside him, something he thought had died years ago. Footsteps approached his hiding spot. Jake tensed, ready to run again. He had to keep moving, keep the Scorpions focused on him for as long as possible. Every minute they chased him was another minute Emily had to find help. The beam of a flashlight swept across the opening of the passageway. Jake held his breath. "Check down there!" someone shouted. Jake pushed off from the wall and bolted deeper into the maze of alleys. The shouts behind him faded, then grew louder as the Scorpions spotted him again. He ran on through the darkness, leading them further and further from the little girl who had somehow, against all odds, made him care again. Jake crashed through the rusty side door of the abandoned warehouse, his lungs burning with each ragged breath. The cavernous space loomed dark around him, silent, except for water dripping somewhere in the shadows. He doubled over, hands on his knees, gulping air. His plan had worked, maybe too well. The Scorpions were still on his trail, but he'd bought Emily some time. He pictured her small figure reaching the diner, finding help among the late-night customers. The image gave him strength. Jake limped deeper into the warehouse, his right knee throbbing from when he'd jumped that last fence. Dust motes danced in the shafts of streetlight filtering through broken windows high above. The place smelled of rust and decay. a forgotten relic of better days. He found a stack of old wooden pallets and collapsed behind them, hidden from view of the doors. His hands trembled as he pulled out his phone. The screen glowed bright in the darkness, illuminating his weathered face. 3 missed calls from Diesel, his second in command. Diesel wouldn't call unless it was urgent. Jake punched in a number, pressing the phone tight against his ear. It rang once, twice. "Who's this?" The voice on the other end was gruff, suspicious. "It's Jake. I need backup." A pause. "Jake? Man, where you been? The whole club's looking for you." "No time to explain. I'm in the old Hargrove warehouse, East Side. Got scorpions on my tail." Jake kept his voice low, ears straining for sounds of pursuit. "They're after a little girl, Diesel. Ghost's kid." "Ghost? That traitor's still alive?" The surprise in Diesel's voice was palpable. "Yeah, and his daughter's caught in the middle. I need bodies here, now." Another pause, longer this time. "We're stretched thin, Jake. The scorpions hit 2 of our spots tonight, but I can get 3, maybe 4 guys to you in 15. Jake closed his eyes briefly. "Make it 10. I'll hold out." He ended the call, shoving the phone back in his pocket. The silence of the warehouse pressed in around him, broken only by the distant wail of sirens somewhere in the city. 15 minutes felt like an eternity when you were being hunted. A text message lit up his phone. Jake opened it, squinting at the bright screen. "Ghost sold us out. Been feeding scorpions intel for months. Watch your back." Jake stared at the message, the words blurring before his eyes. Ghost. Emily's father. A traitor? The man had been a Hell's Angel for years before disappearing. They'd ridden together, fought together. And now he was selling information to the scorpions? The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. The attacks on their territory. The ambushes that seemed too well planned. The scorpions always being one step ahead. Jake thought of Ghost's face when they'd confronted him in that rundown apartment. The man hadn't seemed surprised to see them. He'd seemed ready. And he'd refused to leave with them. Refused to help protect his own daughter. Because he was working with the enemy all along. A wave of anger washed over Jake, hot and familiar. He'd been played for a fool, chasing shadows while Ghost made everything worse. The man had put his own daughter in danger, letting her become a pawn in whatever game he was playing with the scorpions. And now, Jake was trapped in this warehouse, waiting for backup that might not come in time, all because he'd tried to protect a little girl whose own father had betrayed them all. The sound of glass crunching underfoot snapped Jake back to the present. He froze, listening intently. Footsteps, soft but purposeful, moving across the warehouse floor. The scorpions had found him. Jake eased himself lower behind the pallets, one hand reaching for the gun tucked in his waistband. His mind raced, calculating odds, planning escape routes. But beneath the tactical thinking, one thought burned brighter than the rest. Emily was alone out there, and her father, the man who should have protected her at all costs, had sold her out along with everyone else. Jake shoved the phone back in his pocket, his mind reeling from the revelation. Ghost. A traitor. The man had sold out his own brothers, put his own daughter in danger. The bitter taste of betrayal filled Jake's mouth as his fingers curled into fists. All these years, Jake had lived by a code. The club might be rough, violent even, but loyalty was everything. Ghost had broken that sacred trust. A sharp clatter echoed through the warehouse, metal against concrete. Jake tensed, instincts kicking in. He wasn't alone anymore. "We know you're in here, Jake." The voice bounced off the high ceiling, followed by mocking laughter. "No place left to run, old man." Jake recognized that voice. Viper, the Scorpion's second in command. A cruel man with a reputation for unnecessary violence. Jake had crossed paths with him years ago in a bar fight that left 3 men hospitalized. Crouching lower behind the pallets, Jake took stock of his situation. 1 gun, 6 bullets. No backup for at least 10 more minutes. 4, maybe 5 gang members closing in. Bad odds. "Come on out, Jake. We just want to talk." More laughter, joined by other voices now. "About Ghost. About his kid." The mention of Emily made Jake's blood boil. These men would use a little girl as leverage, or worse. Footsteps circled closer, spreading out through the warehouse. Jake could picture them moving between the support columns, checking behind abandoned machinery, guns drawn. They were hunting him methodically, like wolves closing in on wounded prey. A beam of light swept over the concrete floor nearby. A flashlight. Jake pressed his back against the rough wood of the pallets, holding his breath as the light passed inches from his boots. "Boss wants him alive," someone muttered nearby. "At least at first." Another voice snickered. "After what he did to Razor, I ain't making promises." Jake's mind raced. He needed a distraction, something to buy more time. His gaze darted around the shadows, searching for anything useful. 20 feet away, a pile of metal pipes leaned against a wall. If he could reach them. The decision was made in an instant. Jake pulled out his gun and fired 2 shots into the ceiling. The warehouse exploded with shouts and the sound of running feet. Jake used the confusion to sprint for the pipes, staying low. He grabbed the longest one just as a bullet pinged off the concrete beside him. Spinning around, he hurled the pipe with all his strength toward the far side of the warehouse. It crashed through a window with a satisfying explosion of glass. "He's heading out the back!" someone yelled, and multiple sets of footsteps pounded away. Jake slipped between 2 tall metal shelving units, moving deeper into the warehouse's shadows. His breathing was controlled now, his mind clear despite the danger. He'd fought his way out of worse, but the momentary advantage didn't last. "Nice try," came Viper's voice, much closer now. "But I saw you, old man." Jake turned to find Viper standing 10 feet away, a pistol aimed at his chest. The man's snake tattoo crawled up his neck, disappearing into his close-cropped hair. His thin lips curved into a smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. "End of the road," Viper said. More footsteps approached as the other gang members realized they'd been tricked. Within seconds, Jake found himself surrounded, 4 guns pointed at him from all directions. "Drop the piece, Jake," Viper ordered, "unless you want holes in places that don't heal." Jake weighed his options. 3 bullets left, 4 targets, and backup was still minutes away. Slowly, he lowered his gun to the floor. "Smart move," Viper said, stepping closer. "Boss has questions about Ghost, and that little girl." Jake's jaw tightened. "The girl has nothing to do with this." Viper laughed. "Ghost doesn't see it that way. He offered her up real easy." Before Jake could respond, the side door of the warehouse crashed open. Everyone turned, guns swiveling toward the sound. Framed in the doorway stood Ghost, Emily's father. His face was half hidden by shadow, but Jake could see the hard set of his mouth, the cold calculation in his eyes. He stepped into the warehouse, hands raised slightly. "Boys," Ghost nodded to the Scorpions. "Looks like you found him." Viper grinned. "Right where you said he'd be." Jake stared at Ghost, rage building inside him. "You son of a—" "Save it, Jake," Ghost cut him off. This was always going to end this way. The Scorpions moved to encircle both men now, their expressions hungry for violence. Jake could feel the noose tightening around them, the situation deteriorating by the second. Whatever game Ghost was playing, he'd just made everything infinitely worse. The warehouse fell silent, except for the distant drip of water from a leaking pipe. Jake's mind raced through his options, each one worse than the last. Ghost stood there with a smug look on his face, like he'd won some twisted game. "Where is she?" Jake demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Ghost shrugged. "Safe, for now." "That's your daughter, man," Jake said, disbelief coloring his words. "Your own blood." "She's leverage," Ghost replied coldly. "Always has been." The casual way he dismissed Emily made Jake's stomach turn. He'd known men like Ghost before. Selfish, ruthless, willing to sacrifice anyone for their own gain. But to use your own child? That crossed a line Jake couldn't comprehend. Viper stepped closer, gun still trained on Jake's chest. "Enough talking. Boss wants answers." Jake's eyes never left Ghost. "You're trading your daughter to these animals?" "I'm trading her for my freedom," Ghost corrected. "The Scorpions have been after me for years. Emily buys me a clean slate." The rage building inside Jake threatened to explode. He thought of Emily's small hands clutching his jacket, her trust in him, absolute. The way she'd looked at her father with hope, despite everything. "She trusted you," Jake spat. "She thought we were coming to save you." Ghost's face hardened. "That's your mistake, not mine. Never promised to be father of the year." One of the Scorpions laughed, breaking the tension. "Touching family reunion. Now, where's the kid?" Jake's mind flashed to Emily, hidden in the small storage room 3 blocks away. He'd told her to stay put, to lock the door, and not open it for anyone but him. She was scared but brave. Braver than her father would ever be. "Not happening," Jake growled. Viper pressed the gun barrel against Jake's forehead. "Wrong answer." Jake didn't flinch. 4 against 1. Lousy odds. But if he could buy just a few more minutes, his brothers might arrive. The backup he'd called for had to be close now. Ghost took a step forward. "She's in a storage unit on Maple Street. Jake hit her there before coming here." The betrayal hit Jake like a physical blow. Maple Street was only 2 blocks from where Emily was actually hidden. Close enough to be believable, far enough to be wrong. "Go check it out," Viper ordered 2 of his men. "We'll keep these 2 company." As the men left, Jake locked eyes with Ghost, searching for any hint of humanity, any sign that he cared about what happened to his daughter. He found nothing. The decision crystallized in Jake's mind. Backup might not come in time. The Scorpions would search Maple Street, realize Ghost was lying, and tear apart the neighborhood until they found Emily. An innocent little girl would pay the price for their blood feud. Jake couldn't let that happen. Not to Emily. Not after everything. His hand inched toward his boot, where a small knife was hidden. Ghost noticed the movement and the corner of his mouth twitched upward. "Don't do anything stupid, Jake," Ghost warned. But there was anticipation in his voice. He wanted Jake to make a move, to give the Scorpions a reason. Viper kept his gun trained on Jake, but his attention had shifted slightly toward Ghost. "Something you want to share with the class?" Jake's fingers brushed against the handle of his knife. He could take out Viper first, maybe the other Scorpion too, if he was fast enough. But Ghost would still be there, and Emily would still be in danger as long as her father knew where she was. The truth hit Jake like a thunderbolt. He couldn't save himself and Emily. It would have to be one or the other. In that moment, the choice was simple. Jake straightened his shoulders and moved his hand away from the knife. "I'll take you to her," he said, looking directly at Viper. "Just me. Leave Ghost out of it." Ghost's face darkened with surprise, then anger. "That's not the plan." "Shut up," Viper snapped at Ghost, before turning back to Jake. "Why would I trust you?" "Because I'm done running," Jake said, his voice steady. "The girl deserves better than him." He jerked his head toward Ghost. "Take me to her, and I'll come quietly after." It was a desperate play, but it might work. Get Viper away from his backup, lead him somewhere other than where Emily was hidden, and create an opening. Jake would likely die in the process, but Emily would have a chance. For the first time in his hard life, that seemed like a fair trade. Viper glanced at his remaining man, then back at Jake. "Fine. Take us to the girl." Jake nodded, his face betraying nothing. He kept his movements slow and deliberate as Viper motioned him toward the warehouse door. "What about me?" Ghost demanded, a note of panic creeping into his voice. "You stay here," Viper ordered. "Jonesy, keep an eye on him." The remaining gang member nodded, training his gun on Ghost, who looked increasingly uncomfortable with this turn of events. As Jake stepped outside with Viper following close behind, the cold night air hit his face. His ribs ached from earlier blows, and dried blood caked the corner of his mouth. Every breath sent pain shooting through his side. But none of that mattered now. All that mattered was Emily. "Move!" Viper commanded, jabbing his gun into Jake's back. Jake started walking, deliberately heading away from Emily's actual hiding place. His mind raced, calculating angles and chances. He needed to get Viper far enough away that any gunshots wouldn't lead the others to Emily. "You know," Jake said, keeping his voice casual, "Ghost was lying about Maple Street." Viper pressed the gun harder into Jake's spine. "No talking, just walking." "Your men won't find her there," Jake continued anyway. "They'll come back angry, probably kill Ghost out of frustration." "And why would you care?" Viper asked, curiosity temporarily overcoming his caution. Jake shrugged, wincing as the movement sent fresh pain through his bruised body. "I don't. Not about him. But the kid deserves better." They continued in silence for another block, moving deeper into abandoned industrial territory. Fewer buildings, fewer witnesses, fewer places for Emily to be hidden. Jake could sense Viper growing suspicious. "Stop here," Viper ordered suddenly. Jake halted, his muscles tensing. They stood between two vacant lots, far from any potential hiding places. Viper circled around to face him, gun pointed at Jake's chest. "This is a trick," Viper said, his eyes narrowed. "There's nothing here." Jake met his gaze steadily. "You're right." Confusion flickered across Viper's face, quickly replaced by anger. "You trying to die today?" "No," Jake replied calmly. "I'm trying to save someone who deserves saving." "The kid?" Viper laughed harshly. "What's she to you? Some Hell's Angel with a conscience?" Jake didn't answer immediately. What was Emily to him? A stranger's child he'd found hiding behind a truck. But in those few days, she'd become something more, a reminder that innocence still existed in this cruel world, that even someone like him could do something good. "She's just a little girl," Jake said finally. 4 years old, lost her mom, has a piece of garbage for a father. She deserves a chance. Something shifted in Viper's expression. Not softening exactly, but hesitation. For a criminal like him, children were often off limits. There were codes even among outlaws. "Where is she really?" Viper asked, his voice lower now. "Safe," Jake answered. "And she'll stay that way." Viper's finger tightened on the trigger. "You think I won't shoot you right here?" "I know you will," Jake said. "But she'll still be safe." The standoff stretched between them, neither man backing down. Jake stood tall despite his injuries, his eyes never wavering from Viper's. There was no fear in him now, only determination, the kind that comes when a man finds something worth dying for. Viper must have seen it too, because uncertainty crept into his eyes. He was used to dealing with men who begged, who bargained, who broke under pressure. Jake was doing none of those things. "Boss wants the kid as leverage against Ghost," Viper said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Ghost sold out his own daughter," Jake replied. "You think he cares if she lives or dies?" Viper's gun dipped slightly. "This isn't how this works. You don't get to dictate terms." "I'm not," Jake said. "I'm just telling you the truth. The girl stays safe. That's non-negotiable." In that moment, Jake wasn't the same man who'd stepped out of a smoky bar days ago. He wasn't thinking about his colors or his reputation or the code of the streets. He was something different now, something more powerful, a shield between innocence and harm, a protector. And somehow, Viper sensed it. The gun lowered another inch. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Viper's gun remained pointed at Jake, but the hesitation in his eyes was unmistakable. Behind him, the rest of the gang members shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each other with uncertainty. "Boss won't be happy," one of them muttered. Jake stood his ground, shoulders squared despite the pain radiating through his body. Blood trickled down his temple, but his gaze never wavered. He'd spent decades as a Hell's Angel, fighting for territory, for respect, for the club. But he'd never fought for something that mattered this much. "Last chance," Viper said, but the threat in his voice had diminished. "Tell us where the kid is, and maybe you walk away from this." Jake's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "We both know that's not happening." The gang members looked to their leader, waiting for direction, but Viper seemed frozen in place, caught off guard by Jake's unwavering resolve. This wasn't the same man they'd cornered an hour ago. Something fundamental had changed. "He's stalling," one gang member called out. "Let's just take him out and find the kid ourselves." Viper raised his hand to silence him. But the moment of distraction was all Jake needed. With the lightning-quick reflexes of a man who'd survived decades in a violent world, Jake lunged forward. His right hand shot out, grabbing Viper's wrist and twisting the gun away from his body. His left fist connected with Viper's jaw in a solid uppercut that sent the man staggering backward. The gang members froze, momentarily shocked by the sudden attack. Jake used those precious seconds to wrench the gun from Viper's grip and spin the gang leader around, locking him in a chokehold with the weapon pressed against his temple. "Nobody moves," Jake growled, his voice low and dangerous. The gang members raised their weapons, but uncertainty was written across their faces. Their leader was now Jake's human shield, and none of them wanted to be responsible for putting a bullet in Viper's head. "Drop the guns," Jake ordered. "All of them." "Don't listen to him," Viper choked out, struggling against Jake's iron grip. Jake tightened his hold, cutting off Viper's words. "I'm not asking again. Guns on the ground now." One by one, the gang members lowered their weapons. The clatter of guns hitting the pavement echoed in the quiet street. "Now back up," Jake commanded. 20 feet. Move!" They complied, stepping backward with their hands raised. Jake maintained his hold on Viper, the gun steady against the man's temple. "Here's how this ends," Jake said, his voice carrying in the night air. "You walk away. All of you. The girl is off limits. Forever. If I even think you're looking for her, I'll come for each of you, and I won't be alone." He paused, letting the threat sink in. The Hell's Angels have a long memory and a wide reach. Don't test us. "You can't protect her forever," one of the gang members spat. "Watch me," Jake replied, his voice like steel. With a final shove, he pushed Viper toward his men. The gang leader stumbled forward, catching himself before he fell. He turned to face Jake, hatred burning in his eyes. "This isn't over," Viper snarled, rubbing his throat. "For tonight it is," Jake replied calmly, the gun still trained on them. "Now go." For a moment, it seemed like Viper might order his men to attack despite being outmaneuvered. But self-preservation won out. With a jerk of his head, he signaled his gang to retreat. They backed away slowly, their eyes never leaving Jake and the gun in his steady hand. Only when they had disappeared around the corner did Jake lower the weapon. The adrenaline that had kept him going began to ebb, and the full extent of his injuries made themselves known. His ribs throbbed, his face felt swollen, and exhaustion threatened to overcome him. But there was no time to rest. He needed to get back to Emily. Jake moved quickly through the shadows, retracing his steps to the small storage room where he'd hidden her. His heart pounded with each step, fear gripping him that somehow someone might have found her while he was gone. When he reached the door, he knocked softly in the pattern they'd agreed upon. 3 quick taps, too slow. "Jake?" came Emily's small, frightened voice from inside. "It's me, kiddo," he answered, relief flooding through him. "You can open up now." The lock clicked, and the door swung open. Emily stood there, her eyes wide with worry. When she saw Jake, she launched herself forward, wrapping her small arms around his legs. "You came back," she whispered against his jeans. Jake knelt down, wincing at the pain in his ribs, and looked into her eyes. "I promised I would, didn't I?" Emily nodded, her bottom lip trembling. "The bad men." "Gone," Jake said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "They won't bother us anymore." The warehouse fell silent, except for the gentle hum of distant traffic and Emily's soft breathing as she clung to Jake's leg. His body ached from the fight, but the weight of the little girl against him felt like an anchor, keeping him grounded in this moment of unexpected peace. Footsteps echoed from the far corner of the building. Jake tensed, his hand instinctively moving to the gun tucked in his waistband. He gently pushed Emily behind him, his eyes narrowing as a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Emily's father, Ray. His face was gaunt, with several days' worth of stubble darkening his jaw. His eyes, so like Emily's, were bloodshot and weary. He walked slowly, hands slightly raised to show he meant no harm. "Daddy!" Emily cried out, trying to move past Jake. Jake kept his protective stance. "Hold on, kiddo," he said softly, his gaze never leaving Ray. The man had already betrayed them once. Jake wasn't taking any chances. Ray stopped a few feet away. The silence between them stretched out, filled with unspoken accusations and years of bad blood. Emily looked back and forth between the two men, confusion and hope battling across her small face. "They're gone?" Ray finally asked, his voice rough. Jake nodded once. "For now." Ray's shoulders sagged, and for the first time Jake saw beyond the hardened criminal to the broken man underneath. "I heard what happened outside. What you did." "Wasn't much choice," Jake replied, still wary. Ray's eyes dropped to his daughter, then back to Jake. "You could have left, saved yourself." "And let them find her?" Jake shook his head. "Not an option." Another long silence fell between them. Emily shifted uncomfortably, still half hidden behind Jake's leg. "I was wrong," Ray finally said, the words seeming to cost him something. "About everything." Jake studied the man's face, looking for any sign of deception, but all he saw was exhaustion and regret. "I spent years running," Ray continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "From the gangs, from responsibility, from her." He nodded toward Emily. "I told myself she was better off without me." "Was she?" Jake asked pointedly. Ray flinched, as if Jake had struck him. "No." The admission hung in the air between them. "No, she wasn't." Jake felt Emily's small hand tighten around his, and he gave her a reassuring squeeze. "I've made a lot of mistakes," Ray said, taking a tentative step forward. "Too many to count. But leaving her, that was the worst." His voice cracked, and he cleared his throat. "When I heard what was happening, that they were after her to get to me, I couldn't face it. Couldn't face what I'd done." "So you fed them information instead," Jake said, unable to keep the edge from his voice. "Tried to save your own skin." Ray nodded, shame evident in every line of his body. "I was scared. And stupid." He looked down at Emily, who was watching him with those big, trusting eyes. "I'm so sorry, baby girl." Emily took a small step forward, though she kept hold of Jake's hand. "Are you coming home with us, Daddy?" The simple question hung in the air. Ray looked at Jake, uncertainty written across his face. "That depends," Jake said, his voice low. "On whether you're done running. On whether you're ready to be the father she deserves." Ray swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "I want to be. I don't know if I can, but I want to try." For the first time since they'd faced off, Jake felt something inside him relax. The man before him wasn't the same cocky criminal he'd known years ago. Life had humbled him, broken him down. Maybe that was what needed to happen before anything could be rebuilt. "It won't be easy," Jake warned. The gangs have long memories. I know, Ray nodded. But I can't keep living like this. And she deserves better. He knelt down, bringing himself to Emily's level. I've missed so much of your life already, Emily. I don't want to miss any more. Emily looked up at Jake, as if seeking permission, then slowly moved toward her father. When she was close enough, Ray gently pulled her into a hug, his eyes closing as he held his daughter for what seemed like the first time. The small apartment wasn't much, but it had clean walls, a working heater, and windows that let in plenty of sunlight. It sat on the edge of town, far from the territory of any gang Jake had ever known. That was the point. Jake watched as Emily carefully arranged her few possessions on the dresser in her new bedroom. 3 weeks had passed since the warehouse confrontation. 3 weeks of cautious hope and small steps forward. Do you think my bear looks okay here? Emily asked, adjusting a worn teddy bear against her pillow. It was one of the few things they'd managed to retrieve from her old home. Looks perfect, Jake said, leaning against the doorframe. His bruises had mostly healed, though his ribs still ached when he laughed. Not that he'd done much of that in his life. Emily smoothed the bear's fur with gentle fingers. Mr. Cuddles says he likes our new home. Jake smiled. These little moments still caught him off guard. The simple, innocent ways Emily processed the world around her. 4 years old, and already she'd seen more darkness than any child should. Yet here she was, finding joy in a teddy bear's imagined opinions. I like it too, Jake said. And he did. The apartment was small and plain, but it was theirs. No bloodstains on the floor, no weapons hidden under couch cushions. Just clean spaces waiting to be filled with better memories. Ray had helped them find the place before heading to rehab. He'd promised to get clean, to be worthy of being in Emily's life again. Jake wasn't sure if the man would follow through, but for Emily's sake, he hoped so. Can we go to the park today? Emily asked, bouncing slightly on her toes. Jake checked his watch. It was only 10 in the morning, and the day stretched ahead with no dangers to dodge, no enemies to outsmart. Just a normal Thursday with a little girl who somehow trusted him to keep her safe. Sure thing, kiddo. Go get your shoes. Emily darted past him with a squeal of delight, her small feet pattering against the hardwood floor. Jake followed more slowly, still marveling at how quickly she'd adapted to their new routine. The park was only 2 blocks away, a modest neighborhood space with swings, a slide, and enough trees to provide shade on warm days. Jake sat on a bench, watching as Emily made friends with another little girl near the sandbox. His phone vibrated in his pocket. He checked it cautiously. Old habits died hard. But it was only a text from Mac, one of the few angels he still kept in touch with. All quiet on the Western Front. The Skulls have backed off since you took down their leader. Word is, they're regrouping with a new guy in charge. Thought you should know. Jake typed a quick thanks and pocketed the phone. He'd worry about that later. For now, he just wanted to watch Emily build a sandcastle with her new friend. Her face lit up with concentration. That evening, after a dinner of spaghetti and meatballs, one of the few dishes Jake could cook with any confidence, they settled on the couch for their nightly ritual of reading. Emily curled against his side, her small body warm and trusting as he opened the picture book they've borrowed from the library. This one has dragons, Emily informed him seriously. Well, that sounds exciting, Jake said, equally serious. Should I do the dragon voices? Emily nodded emphatically. The scary ones, like you did yesterday. Jake cleared his throat and began to read, adding dramatic growls whenever the dragon appeared. Emily giggled each time, her body shaking with delight against his side. Halfway through the story, Jake glanced down to find Emily's eyes growing heavy, her breathing slowing as she fought to stay awake. Dragon's getting sleepy too, he said gently, closing the book. Let's finish tomorrow. Emily didn't protest as he carried her to bed, her head resting trustingly on his shoulder. She was asleep before he even pulled the covers up. Jake stood watching her for a moment, this small person, who had somehow crashed into his life and changed everything. Before Emily, he'd been just surviving, moving from one day to the next without much thought beyond keeping himself alive. Now, he had reasons to look forward, to plan, to hope. The next morning, Jake woke early. He made coffee and stood by the window, watching as the first rays of sunlight crept across the kitchen floor. The light caught the edges of the simple white curtains Emily had insisted on. "They look like clouds," she'd explained, turning them golden at the edges. For the first time in years, maybe ever, Jake felt a sense of peace settling over him. Not the uneasy quiet between fights, or the exhausted numbness that had so often passed for contentment in his life before. This was different. This was knowing he'd done something good, something that mattered, something worth fighting for. Jake stood outside the clubhouse, the familiar smell of motor oil, cigarettes, and cheap beer hanging in the air. His motorcycle hummed beneath him, a reminder of the man he used to be. He'd left Emily with Mrs. Henderson, the elderly neighbor who had taken a shine to the little girl. Just for a few hours, he'd promised. This was something he needed to do alone. The building looked smaller somehow. The peeling paint and neon beer signs in the windows seemed shabby rather than rebellious. Jake cut the engine and dismounted, feeling the weight of his decision with each step toward the door. The bouncer recognized him immediately, eyes widening slightly. "Jake, no one said you were coming by." "Didn't call ahead," Jake replied. "Mac around." The man nodded, stepping aside to let him in. The interior was dim and smoky, just as Jake remembered. Pool balls clacked against each other from the back room. A few members lounged at the bar, their leather vests emblazoned with patches marking their rank and history with the Angels. Conversations halted as Jake walked in. Eyes followed him, some curious, others wary. He wasn't wearing his colors today, just jeans and a plain black t-shirt under his leather jacket. Mac emerged from the back office, a cigarette dangling from his lips. His face broke into a smile when he spotted Jake. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," he said, extending his hand. "Wasn't sure we'd see you again." Jake shook it firmly. "Needed to talk." Mac gestured toward the office. "Let's grab a beer." Inside, Mac closed the door and handed Jake a cold bottle from the mini-fridge. The office walls were covered with gang photos, newspaper clippings, and maps marking territory. Jake had spent countless hours in this room planning runs and settling disputes. "How's the kid?" Mac asked, settling into his chair. "Good," Jake said. "Getting settled in the new place." Mac nodded, studying Jake's face. "You look different." "Feel different," Jake admitted. He took a swig of his beer, gathering his thoughts. "That's why I'm here." "Figured as much." Mac leaned back. "You're out, aren't you?" Jake met his gaze steadily. "Need to be." A heavy silence filled the room. 20 years of brotherhood hung in the balance. Jake had joined the Angels when he was just a kid himself, angry and looking for a place to belong. The gang had given him purpose, protection, family. But now, he had Emily, and everything had changed. "The guys won't like it," Mac finally said. "Some already think you've gone soft, helping that kid." "I'm not asking for permission," Jake replied. His voice was quiet, but firm. "I'm here, out of respect. Wanted to tell you face to face." Mac sighed, rubbing a hand over his beard. "What about the skulls? They might still come looking for you." "Let them try." The old edge crept into Jake's voice. "But I'm done with the life. Emily deserves better than what I had growing up." Mac studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Never thought I'd see the day Jake Miller walked away." He stood up, extending his hand again. "But I get it. That little girl changed you." Jake took his hand, surprised by the lump in his throat. "She did. You'll need to talk to the others," Mac said. "Some won't take it as well as me." Jake nodded. "I know." They walked back into the main room. The other Angels were watching, sensing something significant was happening. Jake looked around at the faces he'd known for years. Men he'd fought beside, bled with, called brothers. "I'm out," he announced simply, "hanging up my colors." The silence was deafening. Then Big Pete stood up from the bar. "Because of that kid?" His voice held challenge, but also curiosity. Jake met his gaze. "Because it's time." Several of the angels exchanged looks. Some nodded slightly, as if they understood something the others didn't. A few looked angry, betrayed even. "You think you can just walk away?" Razor asked, his voice hard. "After everything?" "I'm not walking away from my debts," Jake said. "But I've got responsibilities now that matter more than this." He gestured around the clubhouse. "Emily needs me more than the angels do." The truth of those words settled over the room. Even Razor couldn't argue with that. One by one, the angels approached Jake. Some shook his hand. Others simply nodded their respect. A few refused to acknowledge him at all. Jake accepted each reaction without comment. When the last man had said his piece, Jake turned toward the door. He could feel the weight of his decision, the life he was leaving behind, the bonds he was breaking, the identity he was shedding. But as he stepped out into the sunlight, that weight lifted. For the first time in decades, he was just Jake. Not a Hell's Angel, not a gang member, just a man trying to do right by a little girl who needed him. He climbed onto his motorcycle, the machine roaring to life beneath him. Without looking back at the clubhouse, Jake pulled away, heading home to Emily and the future they would build together. The summer sun filtered through the kitchen window, casting a warm glow across the small table where Emily sat coloring. Jake leaned against the counter, coffee mug in hand, watching as Emily's father, Ray, helped her stay inside the lines of her coloring book. "Look, Daddy, one made the sky purple," Emily said, holding up her masterpiece. Ray chuckled, a sound that had become more frequent in the past few weeks. "That's amazing, sweetheart. Very creative." Jake took a sip of his coffee, hiding his smile behind the rim of the mug. 3 weeks had passed since their confrontation with the rival gang. 3 weeks of careful steps toward something that resembled normalcy. Ray had moved into an apartment just 10 minutes away and had been visiting Emily every other day. "You want to color too, Jake?" Emily asked, pushing a crayon in his direction. "Maybe later, kiddo," Jake replied. "Your dad's much better at staying in the lines than I am." Ray glanced up at Jake, a silent understanding passing between them. These moments weren't easy for either man. Jake had become Emily's protector, her safe place. Ray was working to earn back a place in his daughter's heart. The transition was delicate, requiring patience from all of them. "We should head out soon if we want to make it to the park before lunch," Ray said, checking his watch. Emily jumped down from her chair, excitement bubbling over. "Can Jake come too?" Ray hesitated, looking toward Jake. "I thought maybe just you and me today, Em. Would that be okay?" Jake recognized the importance of this moment. "I've got some errands to run anyway," he said casually, setting his mug in the sink. "You two have fun." Emily's small face scrunched with uncertainty. "But you always come to the park with me." Jake crouched down to her level, meeting her eyes. "Your dad wants some special time with just you. And that's a good thing, Em. I'll be here when you get back." She considered this, then nodded solemnly. "Promise." "Promise," Jake said, his heart squeezing at her concern. "Now, go have fun, and don't forget to try that big slide you were scared of last time." As Ray helped Emily put on her shoes, Jake felt a strange mixture of emotions swirling inside him. Pride at seeing Emily opening up to her father, sadness at the inevitable shift in his role in her life, and something else, a sense of completion, as if he'd fulfilled a purpose he never knew he had. After they left, the apartment felt unusually quiet. Jake wandered through the rooms, picking up Emily's toys and straightening the pillows on the couch. The place had transformed in recent weeks. Bright drawings now taped to the refrigerator, a small collection of stuffed animals piled on Emily's bed. It had become a home. When they returned hours later, Emily burst through the door, cheeks flushed with excitement. "Jake, I did it! I went down the big slide all by myself," she announced, running toward him. Jake scooped her up, swinging her around. "That's my brave girl." Ray followed behind, carrying a paper bag. "We brought lunch," he said, setting it on the counter. "Thought you might be hungry." The three of them ate sandwiches while Emily recounted every detail of their morning at the park. Jake noticed how Ray listened intently to her stories, asking questions and laughing at her animated descriptions. The awkwardness between father and daughter was fading, replaced by something genuine and warm. Later that afternoon, Ray helped Emily build a fort in the living room, using blankets and chairs. Jake watched from the doorway as they crawled inside with flashlights, their shadows moving against the fabric walls. Emily's giggles filled the apartment, a sound that never failed to lighten Jake's heart. "You should join us," Ray called, noticing Jake standing there. Jake shook his head. "You two seem to be doing fine." As the day drew to a close, Emily grew tired, her energy finally depleted. Ray scooped her up, carrying her to her bedroom for a nap. Jake followed quietly, standing in the doorway as Ray tucked the blankets around her. "Story, Daddy," Emily mumbled sleepily. Ray picked up a book from her nightstand and began reading, his voice gentle. Emily's eyes drifted closed, her small hand wrapped around her father's finger. When her breathing deepened with sleep, Ray carefully extracted himself and joined Jake in the hallway. "She's something else," Ray whispered. Jake nodded. "Yeah, she is." "I've missed so much," Ray said, regret heavy in his voice. "You're here now," Jake replied. "That's what matters." As they stood there watching Emily sleep, Jake knew his time as her primary protector was coming to an end. Ray was stepping up, becoming the father Emily needed. It was bittersweet, but Jake felt no resentment, only a profound sense that things were moving in the right direction. Emily stirred, then sat up suddenly, her eyes finding her father. She reached out her arms, and Ray moved to her bedside. She hugged him tightly, burying her face against his chest. "Love you, Daddy," she murmured. "Love you too, sweetheart," Ray replied, his voice thick with emotion. Jake stepped back into the hallway, giving them their moment. He had done what needed to be done. He had kept Emily safe, helped her find her way back to her father, and in doing so, had found something within himself he thought had been lost forever. Jake sat alone on the front steps of his apartment building, watching the setting sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The evening air carried a gentle breeze that rustled the leaves on the trees lining the quiet street. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past few weeks settle around him like a familiar blanket. So much had changed since that night in the alley. The memory of finding Emily, bloodied and trembling behind that truck, still haunted him. But now, when he closed his eyes, he could also see her smile, hear her laughter, feel the trust she had placed in his rough hands. From his pocket, Jake pulled out his worn leather wallet. Inside was a small photo Emily had drawn for him, a stick figure with a beard standing next to a tiny figure with pigtails. "Me and Jake" was scrawled across the bottom in wobbly letters. He ran his thumb over the drawing, a smile tugging at his lips. "Never thought I'd end up here," he murmured to himself. For most of his life, Jake had been running, from his past, from responsibility, from his own demons. The Hells Angels had given him a place to belong, but it had never truly felt like home. It was just another way to keep moving, to avoid standing still long enough for his past to catch up with him. But Emily had changed all that. Her innocence, her vulnerability, had awakened something in him that he thought had died long ago. Something good, something worth fighting for. Ray had stepped up as Emily's father, finally becoming the man his daughter needed. Jake was proud of him for that. The journey hadn't been easy for any of them, but they had made it through together. Jake stood up, stretching his back. The old injuries from the fight with the rival gang still ached when the weather changed, a reminder of what he had been willing to sacrifice for Emily's safety. "You heading out?" Ray's voice came from behind him. Jake turned to see Ray standing in the doorway, Emily's small hand clutched in his. "Just getting some air," Jake replied. "How was story time?" Emily bounced on her toes. "Daddy does the best voices. Even better than you." Jake clutched his chest in mock offense. "Better than me? I thought my dragon voice was the best." "Your dragon sounds like a grumpy old man," Emily giggled. Ray laughed. "She's not wrong." Jake smiled, seeing the ease between father and daughter that had been missing just weeks ago. It made everything worth it. Every punch, every moment of fear, every difficult decision. "We're heading to the park tomorrow morning," Ray said. "Emily wants you to come." Jake looked at Emily's hopeful face. "Wouldn't miss it." Later that night, after Emily had gone to bed and Ray had left for his own apartment, Jake sat at his kitchen table. He looked around at the space that had once been just a place to crash, now transformed into something that felt remarkably like home. On the table sat the leather vest he had worn for years as a Hell's Angel. The patches and emblems that had once been his identity now seemed to belong to someone else. Someone he used to know but no longer recognized. He ran his fingers over the worn leather, thinking about the man he had been and the man he was becoming. He wasn't running anymore. He wasn't hiding behind anger and violence. For the first time in as long as he could remember, Jake felt at peace with his past. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Jake met Ray and Emily at the park entrance, bringing coffee for Ray and a small box of apple juice for Emily. "Jake!" Emily called, racing toward him. "Watch me on the monkey bars." He followed her to the playground, standing nearby as she swung from bar to bar, her face a picture of determination. Ray stood on the other side, ready to catch her if she fell. "She's getting stronger," Jake commented as Emily made it across without help. Ray nodded. "She's resilient, like someone else I know." They shared a knowing look before Emily demanded their attention again. As the morning progressed, Jake found himself stepping back, watching as Ray pushed Emily on the swings. The sight filled him with a profound sense of contentment. He had helped create this moment, helped heal a broken family, helped a little girl find safety and love. When Emily asked to walk around the pond to feed the ducks, Jake joined them. Emily skipped between the two men, occasionally reaching up to hold Jake's hand. "Are you happy, Jake?" Emily asked suddenly, looking up at him with curious eyes. Jake looked down at her, then at the peaceful scene around them, the sunlight dancing on the pond's surface, families enjoying the beautiful day, Ray walking ahead to buy bread for the ducks. "Yeah, kiddo," he said softly. "I'm happy." And he meant it. For the first time in years, perhaps for the first time ever, Jake felt truly content. He had found his purpose, and it wasn't in the chaos and violence of his past. It was here, in the simple act of protecting those who needed him. Emily squeezed his hand. "I'm happy too," she said, before running ahead to join her father. Jake watched her go, feeling his heart swell with an emotion he was finally ready to name: love. Jake sat in the corner booth of Molly's cafe, his large frame looking almost comical against the delicate white teacup in his hand. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow over the cheerful space. Across from him, Emily arranged her small collection of toy animals on the table, her face scrunched in concentration. "The lion has to go next to the elephant," she explained seriously, moving the plastic figures with careful precision. "They're friends now." Jake took a sip of his coffee, savoring the rich flavor. "Is that right? I thought lions and elephants didn't get along." Emily shook her head, her pigtails swinging. "Not these ones. This lion learned to be nice." "Smart lion," Jake commented with a smile. The cafe buzzed with gentle activity around them. The morning rush had faded. leaving just a few customers typing on laptops or chatting quietly. The barista hummed along to the soft music playing overhead as she wiped down the counter. Jake leaned back in his seat, letting his gaze drift around the room. 6 months ago, he would have been constantly scanning for threats, his body tense and ready for trouble. Now, he felt the unfamiliar sensation of ease spreading through his limbs. They were safe here. The rival gang had moved their operations across town after that final confrontation. Ray had gotten a steady job and was staying clean. And Jake, well, Jake had found something he never expected. "Do you think my daddy will like my drawing?" Emily asked, sliding a folded piece of paper across the table. Jake carefully opened it to reveal a colorful scene. 3 stick figures standing in front of what looked like a house. The tallest wore a black jacket with spiky yellow hair. The medium-sized one had a blue shirt. And the smallest, holding hands with both, wore a pink dress with exaggerated pigtails. "That's you." Emily pointed at the tallest figure. "That's Daddy. And that's me in the middle." Jake felt something catch in his throat. "It's perfect, kiddo. Your dad will love it." Emily beamed at him before returning to her toys. Jake tucked the drawing carefully into his jacket pocket, next to the wallet that no longer contained his Hells Angels membership card. The bell above the cafe door jingled as Molly herself approached their table with a plate of fresh cookies. "On the house," she said with a wink, setting them down. "My favorite customers deserve a treat." "Thank you, Miss Molly," Emily exclaimed, reaching for a chocolate chip cookie. Molly smiled at Jake. "You two becoming regulars around here. It's nice to see." After she walked away, Jake watched Emily savor her cookie, getting chocolate smudges on her cheeks. It still amazed him how quickly she had bounced back from the trauma she'd experienced. Children were resilient in ways adults could only envy. "Jake," Emily asked between bites, "are you still a Hells Angel?" Jake nearly choked on his coffee. "Where did you hear that term?" Emily shrugged. "I heard Daddy talking to Uncle Mike. He said you used to be a big, scary Hells Angel, but now you're different." Jake set down his cup, considering his answer carefully. "I'm not with that group anymore. I decided I wanted different things." "Like what things?" "Like peace and quiet. Like mornings in cafes with chocolate chip cookies." Emily nodded, as if this made perfect sense. "And like taking care of me?" "Yeah, kiddo. Exactly like that." She seemed satisfied with his answer and returned to her toys, creating an elaborate story about the lion and elephant going on an adventure together. Jake watched her, marveling at how this tiny person had completely transformed his life. The violence and chaos of his past felt distant now, like a movie he had watched rather than a life he had lived. Outside the cafe window, people walked by, normal people going about their normal days. For the first time, Jake felt like one of them. Emily looked up suddenly, her eyes bright with joy. "Can we go to the park after this? I want to show Daddy my new tricks on the monkey bars when he meets us there." Jake smiled, his heart full. Absolutely. They had weathered the storm together, and now here they were, planning park visits and sharing cookies. A new chapter was beginning, one Jake had never imagined possible for someone like him. "Ready to go?" he asked, gathering Emily's toys. She nodded, slipping her small hand into his large one as they stood up. They walked out of the cafe into the bright, clear day, hand in hand, ready for whatever came next. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.